So for any of you who work in school districts where your auditoriums are being renovated and there's an architect on board and some engineering firms on board, and part of your scope of work is, let's say, stage rigging or lighting or audio or video or any of the technical parts of the auditorium, I just wanted to give you an idea of how the two paths of renovations go.
Two paths lie before you.
This is your red pill or blue pill moment, my friend.
Now, in one path, the architect hires a theater consultant or other qualified people on board for money who stay with the job from the get-go to the tail end, make sure it's done properly, make sure it's set up properly, make sure people are trained properly on all
Let's just slow down a minute and make sure it's done right.
the equipment they get, and that everything goes the way the owner would really like it to. The other group of renovations, we get what is called vendor specs. Now, vendor specs are interesting. You hire an architect, they have an engineering firm working for them. Typically, the electrical engineer gets tasked with doing audio, video, and theatrical lighting. Now, there are some who actually know something about this, and there's a lot who don't. So what ends up happening is they get what is called a vendor involved. Now, a vendor is a third party who often does have a skill set, but they're also tied to equipment lines they specify. So their role is a little odd. They're not getting paid for their time. So they are interested and not, because in a public bid market, they may or may not ever get the job. It's less than 50-50, depending on how many bidders there are. So I've worked in that realm. Back when I was in the contracting business, I worked with vendors speccing on a few projects, and then after a while said, why am I spending my time on this when I probably won't win the job anyway? But that's a whole other story. So the way a vendor spec works is a vendor who actually has some skill set provides a minimal amount of information to the engineer, who then transfers that to drawings and specifications. Now, in some cases, it may be done fairly well. In some cases, it may be very, very basic. We've seen things as simple as one drawing for an entire audio system with no information of how to actually connect or do any of the things that need to happen, like zoning, delay zones, where speakers actually get located, how they get aimed, that kind of thing. With video projection, often it's left where there's really no indication of where there's inputs and outputs. We've seen theatrical lighting systems where it's called out LED par fixture, and that's as far as it goes. And the spec is generic, which means the chances of you getting what you might actually want are fairly slim. So the problem I have with vendor specs is twofold. One is it's wasting the time of someone who may never get paid for their participation, which as a consultant, I just object to that.
That is a lucid, intelligent, well thought out objection.
Because we get paid for our involvement, and I think that's the way life should be. We did a school district where we did all of the acoustical work for all of their auditoriums, and they wanted high quality acoustics in their auditoriums, so we made them pretty reactive. These rooms have a lot of interaction, so anything that happens in the room is very audible. Someone else did the theatrical lighting. Now, we did the stage shell, and we had specified a specific light we wanted in the stage shell because we're concerned about noise over the orchestra. So what ended up happening is the engineer we were working with on that one, and we weren't vendor speccing, we were getting paid for a different part of the project, but oddly enough, weren't doing the theatrical lighting. So we had our fixture spec for the part of the job we cared about, and then the rest of it was handled by the engineer. Now, to his credit, he worked with a manufacturer's representative who gave him good information, and he spec'd some really good fixtures for the rest of the lighting system. The problem came in when the project was bid, and the low bidder substituted everything. So everything that was in the job was LED lighting that had been selected for two aspects. One is color quality, and the other is fan noise. The substitute that ultimately ended up getting taken by the electrical engineer because he didn't know any better. He was going by cut sheets that don't talk about noise. That's one of the specs nobody's doing yet. Takes the substitute, and then once it's installed, we're getting contacted by the owner because we did the acoustics, wanting to know why the lights are so noisy. So we explained to them the rules of the road and how this all works, and that the LED lights they had could indeed be quiet if you were willing to accept 60% light output, because that's the only way to get the fans on these things to shut up. Now, the problem is the vendor who is involved in making that alternate selection to substitute for the bid wanted to make a sale.
A lot of people make money that way.
And they made their sale based on lumen output, color rendering index, and other factors. And there was nothing in the spec by the engineer about noise. Now, we as consultants in all of our specs for LED lighting have specific specifications for noise. And we would never accept a particular substitute that was accepted on this job. So we put our 2 cents in, even though we probably shouldn't have. And the owner is now trying to figure out how they're going to resolve this. So they've got to accept either low light output or noise in a room that was designed acoustically where you could hear nuances and harmonics, and everybody was going to be really happy with the room acoustics. So I guess in this particular case, the vendor spec thing is kind of awkward, because if the engineer had gone back to the original manufacturer's rep and said, hey, what do you think of this substitute? Obviously, he's going to say, I don't like it, because he's not making the sale. So both sides of that road are kind of rough. You've got people who are disinterested and not getting paid. You got people who are interested in getting paid if they make a sale. So a lot of things can go wrong. So in my opinion, when a school district, there was a bug, by the way.
Hit the alert button. Yes, sir.
In my opinion, if a school district cares about the performance of all of their systems in their auditoriums, they need consultants on board that work for them or work for the architect, but are not part of any sales organization that has a vested interest in selling product as opposed to meeting performance standards. Now, this is an example of lighting. In audio, we've had even worse things we've seen. We've seen people take a design that might have been fairly competent from a vendor, allow substitutions of everything, including where the speakers are located. Most recently, we were in an auditorium where they substituted a speaker that was completely inappropriate, but then because of whatever bizarre thinking, decided that having a pair in the front of the auditorium in the corners, a pair halfway down the auditorium against the side walls, and a pair in the rear corner of the auditorium firing forward would be a really good idea, with a loudspeaker that has a bizarre coverage pattern to begin with. And this was not surround sound. These were not processed, independently tuned, delayed in any manner, trying to make the whole thing work. They were just all running in unison. So it was kind of like a Hall of Mirrors effect when you got into the room. So we were called in to figure out why there were all these echoes in the room. And we had to point out that the problem was where all the speakers were located and what they were. And the room itself did not want that to happen. But by the time we got involved, they already owned all of this and they had accepted it and they were kind of stuck with it. So I guess a word to the wise, in public bid situations, someone needs to specify exactly what you as the end user wants. And that shouldn't be somebody who is selling product. It should be somebody who's interested in what you want, not what they want. Now, in our world as consultants, we have preferences. We might like a particular audio console or a particular lighting console. But if you like a different one as an end user, the job of a consultant is to get you what you want, not to get you what we want. So, word to the wise, get consultants on board. Typically, with some architectural firms, they automatically do this because they know. But with some of them, you have to force the issue. And we have, in our case, been kind of thrown at some architects where they didn't want to hire a consultant, but they had to because the end user was smart enough and savvy enough to say, hey, we don't want to leave this to the engineers or to a vendor. And in defense of engineers, There are some who really do have more than a hobby interest in audio, video, and lighting, and that's awesome. Stage rigging is a whole nother issue, and we can talk about that in another video because that becomes a safety issue. Some of you might be wondering what someone who knows something about acoustics is thinking. Being outdoors, and what is that weird noise? Well, that weird noise is these guys. Because in the gazebo by my pool, the birds like to build nests up here. These things scare them away. And while it's kind of annoying in a video to have them in the background, I kind of enjoy being outdoors, and I left it in anyway.
This is your red pill or blue pill moment, my friend.
It's like I took the pill and I'm in the Matrix. I'm